The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Hello, I'm Carl Seidel, host of The People's View. The show is sponsored by the Nashua City Republican Committee, and if you like to attend our meetings, they're the second Thursday of every month at 6:30 at the Crown Plaza. And if you want to find out more about our organization, you can go to nashuagop.org to see our website and learn about the events that we have.
Welcome to The People's View.
Hello, and help me welcome the Senate President, Chuck Morse. Chuck.
Thanks for
Thank you
having
for
me.
coming on, and I hope to find out a little bit how the Senate's thinking about this upcoming session. We had a special commission. They are generating some legislation, and that's probably going to be focused on what we can do immediately and what takes a little bit longer. And then we have retained bills, and then we have the rest of the session.
It's going to be a long session.
What can you tell me about the commission and from the Senate's point of view?
Well, the commission's been functioning now for about a month. It's just finishing up its work, and that commission has recommended 3 pieces of legislation that's going to be expedited coming up in the first week of January, and we hope to get it to the House within the next couple of weeks of that. We're going to do joint hearings on that. And that piece of, or those 3 pieces of legislation are like increasing the penalties on fentanyl. We're talking about being able to educate younger people earlier. Those are the bills we're going to expedite right now. Obviously, there's some bills that have financial implications. We have those bills going in a regular phase that's coming up right after that. And then we'll start into the session. And in the Senate alone, I mean, we have 300 bills if you count the retained bills. So we have a busy session.
And there's only 24 of you to work on it, whereas we have a few more in the House.
Yeah, for the first time, the Senate actually on, convening day is going to take up legislation. That's how many bills we have. I mean, we're taking up 30-some bills on the first day, on the 6th of January, and then we're coming back the next week to take up some of the bills to deal with the drug task force and to take up some bills that we have retained bills. But we're going to start early, and then obviously that process is going to move along, and then we'll get into healthcare, which I think is the next big debate.
What's going to be the main points with healthcare?
Well, reauthorization on healthcare. I mean, I think the people in New Hampshire need to understand we built a new unique healthcare system in New Hampshire. We built private health insurance policies, and we want to see how that's working. I mean, we know 40,000 people signed up for it. We want to make sure it's driving down costs in New Hampshire on uncompensated care, but we also want to make sure it's effectively making change in the state because we don't want people going to emergency rooms, and we certainly want to make sure they're signing up for the insurance policy so that we drive down the uninsured. Things like that need to be debated, and I think there was a host of other things that we seriously want to look at. I mean, the federal government is famous for backing off on paying for things. We want to make sure that we create a system in New Hampshire that's fully paid for by the federal government or some other system, but not the taxpayers in New Hampshire. That's very important to both the House and the Senate right now. And we want to start to talk about what effects it's had, along the way, like I said, for change, but, also what effects has it had on our workforce? I mean, because we're starting to hear from business people that there's not enough people, applying for jobs, at any end. I mean, whether it's the end that we're hearing from the colleges and the universities or from the lower end. I mean, there's just not enough bodies in New Hampshire, and we want to make sure we haven't done anything that affected that.
Well, I know because of the late approval of the budget this year that some of the contracts haven't even been placed yet for the private insurance, have they? That's my understanding.
Well, on substance abuse, for instance, we're very concerned. I mean, there's numbers upwards of $80 million in this budget that was approved, to have change, and I mean, just in drugs and alcohol, there's a 75% increase in funding. We're very concerned that money hasn't been spent yet. We've been hopeful that now that we get out of the drug task force has done all their work, we can go into January and start to bring the departments in. We still have not in the state of New Hampshire closed the books on 2015, which we're giving an extension to the middle of January on that. But you really can't go forward and do spending bills without looking at 2015. From everything I'm seeing, the legislature did a good job of estimating revenues. I don't think there's going to be a gravy train that's any larger than we predicted. As a matter of fact, what I'm hearing today is it's going to be a little less. So I think we have to be very careful on what we did coming out of 15. And then as we move forward here, I think we need to start to talk about, because we delayed the budget 3 or 4 months here, what happened there? What savings happened, and why didn't programs get implemented?
And you were talking about being able to continue some of these insurance programs. You have to get waivers from the Medicaid people to be able to do it differently. Do they require any kind of summary of what's happened so far before they'll do that?
Well, the waivers, having done the first set, I think what we need to do is we need to talk to Washington together, both parties, and ask questions. What happened during the first Senate Bill 413? We had a lot of great ideas, and a lot of great ideas got shot down, and we came up with what we had, which I think is a good piece of legislation. Now I want to know it works.
Yeah, that's right.
But as we talk about that, if you just take one thing like work requirements, that was originally talked about, and we wanted it in the legislation because we could see where it would, set this thing in society where people might not go to work. And we didn't want that to happen. We effectively wanted able-bodied people to be looking for jobs.
Yeah.
I think that's what society wants. We'll help them out with the insurance to make sure they can get their health care, but we also want to keep them, in society. And I think the scare there is people are afraid they'll lose their health insurance. We need to work as a society to take care of that, but reality is we don't want to stop them from going into the workforce.
That's right.
And I think Washington, whether they outright said no to New Hampshire or not, we didn't get it. And I think we want to talk about that one. So.
Well, there's one other aspect to that, too. They have a cutoff point. You make $1 over that, you lose your support, your subsidy. Is there some way of phasing that, so that people want to advance, want to get a better job or something like that, don't immediately lose all their health care or all the subsidy?
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what I was talking about. I think we have to come into a scaled version, how we work with Washington on that. I mean, I honestly believe in the future this will be block grants to the states, and the states will be able to determine that. If the ultimate goal is to make sure that everyone's insured, we need to make people understand what the costs are. So that when they go and get these services, they know that if you go to one place, it's $1,000. If you go to another, it's $1,500. How we make that change, we've done great things in New Hampshire. We have managed care in New Hampshire now that is basically teaching people not to go to the emergency room and effectively get services in our Medicaid population. We need to continue doing that. And it's an exercise that I think is working for New Hampshire. But I also think there's some things we need to do to enhance that.
Well, let's slip back a little bit to the Drug Commission and everything. What you said there's a few that you have immediate, that are going to be voted on immediately in January and made legislation real quick. And I know one of the other issues is a little longer study is the drug courts. Can you go into that a little bit?
Well, I think drug courts actually will come into one of the earlier pieces of legislation. I think where it's not like going to happen in the first week is because we've been meeting with the county governments, and each county is looking, or actually each town and city looks at things differently. And what they don't want us to do in Concord is put in drug courts that make them change how they're doing it. So that part of it is something that we need to work out with county government so that we can put this in place. I think in general, most people think we need to do something with drug courts throughout the state. And I think we'll probably come up with something like a pilot program that lets the counties that want to go in right away go in. I mean, there is no doubt in my mind Manchester is ready to go today. And I think we need to be able to help them get there. There's a few other things that I think we need to do along with it. But on drug courts, I think it's just a matter of the legislature doing what it does best, and that's figure out a way that'll work for the whole state.
Does some of the legislation take care of that gap of the people, the users who don't qualify for drug court help, but somehow need guidance or some kind of help in rejecting the drugs?
Well, it doesn't take care of it in the legislation hasn't been written yet for that. But I mean, there's definitely a three-legged stool out there that we all talk about. You know, treatment's one phase of it, and I think that needs to be enhanced. A lot of that was done in the budget phase. We've been dealing with mental health. We've been dealing with drugs. I mean, I think they all need to move forward. I don't think the spending's caught up, to be honest with you. I mean, I'll give you one example in New Hampshire, and then I'll get back to your question. But, you know, we appropriated 10 new beds for mental health so that we could stop having people sit in a hospital, 20-some people a day, and we could, you know, work with New Hampshire Hospital. We can't get the staff right now, the 10 people, to run that. But if you're in the legislature, your question is, why not?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you knew this was coming. We built this a year ago, and it should be up and running. I mean, and I think there's a lot of things that we question on that issue. But in any case, as for that three-legged stool, I mean, we know we have to have treatment. We know we have to have something ahead of that. There's a great program going up in Manchester where private business people are doing something, and if we can enhance that, we will basically create the door that'll give people guidance to where they should be getting services.
Have you heard of the Harbor Homes arrangement here in Nashua? We went to a meeting there, and it seems that they've been able to coordinate a number of groups and work more as a cooperative, covering all these aspects of people in need, whether it's food, diet, drugs, or some other kind of mental health problem. And they also qualify for special federal grants, I understand. And they're only one of two in the state. And I think something like that, if we can get them to work together and have more of those around. I know last year when I heard testimony, they want to have 4 central mental health areas in the state, north, south, east, and west, I guess, plus the one in the center. Is that something that you know if the Senate is working on?
Well, there's a whole host of things when you're combining mental health with drugs. I mean, I know it's 2 separate areas, but there's a whole host of things moving along fairly quickly. You know, as you talked about the healthcare bill included something that not a lot of people paid attention to, but it was an 1115 waiver to help these mental health organizations stand their organizations up. New Hampshire spends a lot of its own money and doesn't get it matched on healthcare by the federal government. That could be $20 or $30 million a year. I think the approval for that is coming right now.
Good.
We started that in 2014. But that will help organizations basically create the structure that they need. This isn't going to work, and I want the public to understand that, unless this has, you know, private organizations, the people in the community, and the government. If the government's the only one doing it, it isn't going to work because there's too much to it, and government is just a tough place to, you know, we don't do it the best. I mean, we certainly can set the seed to make it the best, but I would say if we're running everything, it's not going to work. So.
Well, I think that's the same way with the federal government.
Yeah, and which has been difficult throughout this whole process. But I mean, you know, when I get back to that three-legged stool, one thing that Nashua I think will benefit from is we saw during this phase of putting the 26 people on the task force that, you know, we also need to beef up law enforcement in New Hampshire. I mean, the traffic stops are working in Manchester, and we need to do that throughout the state and work with our state police to do that. And I see a lot of energy there, and that's where I see, there's a benefit. We provide some pilot program to our state police. They team up with the local police and basically start to make this work. I mean, I think everybody in the state of New Hampshire believes that we need to stop letting this into New Hampshire. So as we teach people not to be users, which is a big part of this, we also need to stop it from coming in. And we also need to increase the penalties so that people don't want to traffic in this state. And I think as we do that, it'll put together a great program.
Do you know if there's any legislation proposed for education, improving the education process?
Senator Stiles put together a piece that's in the expedited mode. That piece needs to be worked out with the fine-tuned parts because obviously during this task force, we heard that you really need to get to younger people and you really need to get them to them in a way that works for them. I don't know if you saw Alex speak at the task force, but he comes in with this young lady and they do a presentation of his life and how his life, kind of went a little bit awry, and he's trying to bring it back, and he definitely, I think everybody saw at the task force, this is for life. This process that they have to go through is for their whole life. So when you went through this, we said, there's something the state of New Hampshire could get involved with and put them into every school that, wants to work with it and do these presentations. It was very effective. It was very effective to the legislature. Maybe we're just getting older and, it's when we don't know what's going on in the streets, but I think he did a great job of presenting to the committee, and the committee thought that was one way we could educate. And Senator Stiles obviously wants to go a little bit further with that. You got to be cautious, because the one thing I don't want to do is mandate on the local school system, because we're basically trying to teach them that there is a problem that we think needs to be dealt with at a younger age. Whether that means enhanced DARE programs or not, I think this is going to evolve.
Well, as you can say, you have to have the support of the people who are going to present that. Otherwise, it doesn't go over at all. If they're not involved, if they're not willing to talk about it, not willing to show people the way. I got involved in that in the 90s. I worked for DuPont, and we had a community relation thing. And we happened to have a customer who was studying the effect of cocaine on the brain. I don't know if you ever heard that film. DuPont wound up giving out 12,000 of these videotapes, which shows the effect of the different uses of cocaine on the brain, the circulation of the blood on the brain. And that, showed that a crack user had a brain like an Alzheimer's patient. So, and you can recover, but it's an awful long time before your brain can recover from something like that. But I thought that was an effective thing.
Yeah, I think this is going to take a lot of talk and figure out a way to, tell young people that, what the long-term effects are going to be on them. But, I think it was very obvious during the task force that, number one, this doesn't go away, and number two, it's everywhere. And I think that, by doing that, I think the legislature gets it. There's a lot more to do, though. It isn't going to happen overnight. I mean, it didn't just start, and I want the public to understand that.
It's flaring up now, but
we funded a lot in the budget because we knew there was a problem.
Yeah.
If we weren't delayed in appropriating this budget, I think we would have been working on this already.
Definitely.
And we, but I think Senator Bradley, Representative Hinch, they did a great job of leading this charge, and I think it'll go into January. So.
Yeah. So what else do you think you might be bringing up during the session? Is there any other issues that...
Well, with 300 bills, there's going to be a lot coming up, and a lot of it looks the same. I mean, I went this morning through the Senate bills, and 13 of them are exactly the same, and I guess I have to make a decision on that. But you will have some of the same subjects. I mean, obviously, people are talking about minimum wage again, and they're talking about reauthorization of health care. Those subject matters will come forward. There's a gaming bill in there that I saw, and that's been something that pops up every time, and so you'll see some of that. But I think some of the more important things are, the 10-year highway plan.
That's definitely, I'm on the Public Works Committee, and I know how that is.
Yeah, that's going to be an important one. I think with all the funding that we've put into the highway system now, I think, we're expecting to see things start to work for the state of New Hampshire.
I read in the paper now that the plan of the governor's version of it, I guess you might say, is going to have full funding. How does she come up with that? That's going to be...
Full funding on I-93 or on
well, it said on
10-year highway
on the
plan in
10-year
general?
plan. They're not putting anything in there unless it has a funding.
Well, I mean, it's like anything else, get in line. I mean, so
Yeah.
I probably would agree with that. If $1 billion plan, if that's what we have, is fine. I mean, I've built the budgets every time.
I'm waiting to see this.
I'm waiting to see it too. But I mean, I think what we've got over in New Hampshire is we found a funding source for I-93, which I think has been taken up about 25% of the funding. I do think what will happen, that will make it easier with this TIFIA program that we put in place. That program is going to create about $20 million more per year for all the communities in the state of New Hampshire. So I think that definitely was something we worked on in the Senate phase of the budget. When we went to committee at conference, it literally became a no-brainer that we were going to implement that $200 million worth of road work over a 9-year period. And I know if you do the math at 20 times 9, it doesn't work, but it's 200 million. So the reality is it's good for New Hampshire. I think we need to get these bridges and roads going, but I also need, we need to ask questions. That's what the legislature is there for. I mean, we can't stop asking questions, why the costs are going up and things like that. So
well, I know one thing that people in Nashua are going to be asking about is if there's any money for the rail improvement. And I don't know whether there's any sympathy in the Senate for that or not, but it's going to be a tough one.
It's not sympathy. I was on Public Works in 1998. That's when I started in the House. I mean, and we've been debating this. I'm going on to close to 20 years involved in politics because I was a selectman before that. And, I think the dollars that are collected under the gas tax situation, I mean, we're going to get hit every time we talk about rail. Right. So, if it's a different funding source, which the legislature has not gone to. I mean, that last raise that Senator Rouse put in there is effectively being used because we know we have a bridge problem. And we wanted to get more money into betterment so that communities could deal with that and they could deal with local roads. We accomplished that. If we're going to put our minds together, bringing rail to Nashua was always something I was willing to do. But then when you go and add a project to it of $200 million, and let's bring it to Manchester without any studies, I've been on commissions since, I think it was on one in 2004, that heavily financed commission that had 30 or 40 people from every organization in the state. And we certainly had people that said that's not where we should be spending highway dollars. It needs to happen in your committee and in the same committee in the Senate. It needs to be debated, and it shouldn't be easy.
No, it's not easy. And I think you really have to educate the surrounding communities because when we voted on it, you might have had people from Nashua and Manchester vote for it in our committee, and the rest of the state didn't vote for it at all.
I know, but to bring it to Nashua, there's some logic in what we originally talked about. I mean, so I'm not against it. I'm not against any debate that happens in Concord and how you solve problems. I mean, if you saw how we solved the gas tax problem that Senator Roush did, I mean, I can tell you for 3 nights, the senators were in some pretty heated debates at night about whether that money was going to operations or going to paving roads.
Right.
It ended up paving roads. And I think that was a great thing that happened. And, that's what's great about that organization up there. 425 people are debating things, and I'm all for that.
Well, I think you're right. And I think that one of the people ought to look at it too, from the state from an east to west transition too. They have no real good way of getting from east to west. And if you mesh that all together, you're doing a lot more benefit to the state. I'll bring up a different subject, something that I just heard of within the last month. What do you think of a state bank?
The infrastructure bank?
Yeah.
It's been brought up.
Right.
But when it comes down to it, what's filling the bank?
Yeah.
And, because we were on Pettingill Road, that was certainly where that was brought up. And that's in North Londonderry.
Right.
Since then, North Londonderry's worked out its problems, and they basically moved forward. I really do think everything that's been done in the last 2 years is putting us into a much more effective department. The fact that we have a new commissioner, I think it's time to, if everyone's going to come to Concord and say we need more money, more money, more money, it isn't going to work.
No.
I mean, I already told you, we did this TIFIA thing, and we created $20 million more per year. I think that was a great thing. Senator Rausch's 4 cents created $32 million a year. It might be $34 million a year. The revenues that I just looked at, for the year so far, we're up $7 million. When
Right.
everyone told me, gas tax isn't going to bring in any more money, go on and on and on. Things are positive in New Hampshire. The economy's growing in New Hampshire. I think that's a good thing. What I think is a bad thing is we're not finishing things. I-93,
Yeah.
the plan to finish that's going right into 2020. I mean, when I worked with Governor Lynch on this, I remember saying, he said to the department, can we get this done in 3 years if we get the funding? And the reality
boy.
was,
Yeah.
Senator Rausch got the funding, and we all thought it would get done in 3 years, and that's not the answer right
environmental
now.
problem.
So, well, there's all kinds of things. I mean, when I first came into the Senate, we didn't have the permits to do that highway. And I can assure you, we in the Senate met on a Friday afternoon with everybody in the country and in the state of New Hampshire in the Senate caucus room, and we got the permits
Good.
on that Monday to build that highway. But that was like 2004, and look where we are. We're not done. I mean, I think we need to finish some things. So.
Well, I agree, but we're going to have an interesting session.
Yes,
And I'd like
for
to
sure.
invite you back somewhere in the middle of it so we can see what's happening and what still has to be done.
Well, it's great to be here. I appreciate it.
Well,
Thanks.
I appreciate you coming. Thank you very much for the interview.
Thanks.
And thank you for listening in. And don't forget that the Nashua City Republican Committee meets every second Thursday of the month at the Crown Plaza. Please come. Thank you again for being here.
Thanks, Carl.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.